What's going on, everybody? Hope everyone is enjoying their day so far. And we are back with another Fantasy Weekly live show. As today we're going to be going through our Week 9 recap, going through today's trade deadline, everything that's happened, and everything that's going to be affecting your fantasy football teams moving forward of this 2025 season. We'll also do our Week 10 fantasy starts and sits, give you a couple of players that you need to put into your lineups and some players that you need to be leaving on your bench. We'll also be looking at how our team did in week number 9 to see if we continue our win streak. And we will also look at the waiver wire ads to see if we do need to add any players. And also, we did put out a video today of our week 10 waiver wire ad. So if you want to keep track of that before you make your waiver claims and spend your fab overnight here as we turn to Tuesday to Wednesday, make sure you tune into that video. But let's go ahead and dive into our Week 9 recap. As we always do here to start the show, we're going to go through our studs and duds for each position. And we're going to start off with the quarterback, and that's going to be Caleb Williams is our quarterback stud of the week. And Caleb Williams, 280 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns, and that crazy game between the Bears and the Bengals on Sunday afternoon. He also got a receiving touchdown. You saw Ben Johnson call up the trickery there, so he got that receiving touchdown. Ended up with 39.7 fantasy points. I know I started him in one of my leagues, which I desperately needed a win in that league to really get off the schneid. I was 1-7. Was able to get to 2-7 in that league, and Caleb Williams was definitely a big part of that, almost 40 fantasy points. So Caleb Williams, I know that he's had a couple of dud games, but Caleb Williams does have a good matchup this week against the New York Giants, and what could be another high-scoring shootout, especially with the way that Jackson Dart and that offense is rolling. So expect a lot more points in that matchup as well. Before I go further into the studs and duds, like I always mentioned before the show here starts, if you have any questions pertaining to trades that you want to send or starts or sits, let me know down in the comments, and I will get to it as soon as I can. Now let's continue on with our studs here. We'll go to Rico Dowdle of the Carolina Panthers. And it looks like Rico Dowdle has become this RB1 in this Panthers offense. With Chuba Hubbard going down a couple of weeks ago, we saw Rico Dowdle really get the opportunities there with Hubbard out, and he was able to get back-to-back 30-plus point fantasy outings. Last week, it was an okay performance for Rico Dowdle, but it was a big one for the Panthers in this win against the Green Bay Packers. He had 25 rushing attempts, so he has clearly taken over this backfield, 130 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 2 receptions, 11 yards. So he's not going to give you too much volume in the passing game. Most of the volume will come through the rush. But 29.1 fantasy points and what on paper looked like was going to be a tough matchup for Rico Dowdle and the Carolina Panthers turned out to be a good one against the Green Bay Packers. So Rico Dowdle is a clear must-start option moving forward because he looks like he has taken over the bell cow role in Carolina. He does have a good matchup against the New Orleans Saints, who is one of the more bottom defenses against the rush as well as against the pass. Now let's move on to our wide receiver stud. There was plenty of wide receiver studs this week, but we got to give credit to T. Higgins. Even in the loss, I mean, the Bengals put up 42 points and lost. It's how bad this Bengals defense has been this season. But we saw T. Higgins blow up games, 7 receptions, 121 passing yards, and 2 touchdowns. Good enough for 34.1 fantasy points. You had Chase Brown score almost 20 fantasy points. Jamar Chase had an okay game, but it was T. Higgins really the story of this one. Joe Flacco, I talked about him on today's waiver wire ad that I know that the Bengals do have a bye week, but Joe Flacco moving forward could definitely be a viable candidate for your fantasy lineups moving forward. And T. Higgins, blow-up game, even in the blowout, not even like the blowout loss. It was just a devastating loss for the Bengals. Ended up losing 49-42 in that one. So T. Higgins earns our wide receiver stud. And let's go ahead to our tight end stud, another blowout game. And this time from Brock Bowers. We have not seen Brock Bowers in quite some time. He was dealing with the injury. Raiders were coming off of the bye week. And Bowers, 12 receptions, 127 receiving yards, and 3 touchdowns to get him to 43.3 fantasy points. And I'm sure if you start Brock Bowers, you were able to get the victory here in week number 9. And we'll talk about this whenever we go to the trade news, but with Jacoby Myers now out of Las Vegas, that really leaves a wide open door for Brock Bowers to be tight end 1 rest of the season. I know Trey McBride has really been consistently good for the Arizona Cardinals, though there has been a quarterback change, looks like, in Arizona. But Brock Bowers, really the only competition outside of him was Thornton as well as Trey Tucker. So Brock Bowers, definitely good news today that you got with Jacoby Myers getting traded to the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Brock Bowers, easily a top 3 tight end rest of season. And you're going to see a lot of these games moving forward because Geno Smith, not too really many options at the receiver. It's really Brock Bowers and everyone else in this Raiders offense. They do have a tough matchup on Thursday night, which we will get into against the Denver Broncos. So we will see how this Raiders passing attack looks without Jacoby Myers. But, I mean, let's be honest with you, Jacoby Myers hasn't been that great in the offense. We'll see how Myers does in Jacksonville. So that is our studs of the week. Let's go on to our duds. And Jordan Love was our one of our studs a couple of weeks ago. Now he's our dud. 273 yards. He did have an interception in that loss against the Carolina Panthers, in which the offense didn't really do too much. You saw Tucker Kraft get injured out for the season. And then you saw most of Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs did finish the day with a touchdown and 20 fantasy points on the day. But Jordan Love, 10 fantasy points. And what I thought was going to be an okay matchup for you to start Jordan Love. But the Carolina Panthers defense, honestly, the most underrated units in fantasy football this season. But Jordan Love, I do expect this offense to bounce back. It was a tough matchup going against the Carolina Panthers. They'll have some easier matchups the rest of the season. Now let's move on to the RB dud, Kamani Vidal of the Los Angeles Chargers. It wasn't really too much of Vidal after a blow-up game that he had last week. It was a good matchup going against the Tennessee Titans this week, which I thought Vidal was just going to be the clear-cut RB1, and the Chargers were able to get this thing done. But only 12 rushing attempts, 30 yards. So he's still getting the bulk of the carries in this offense, but 3 fantasy points. And at this point, we're just waiting for Martin Hampton to get off of the injured reserve. Don't know when that's going to happen or not. We will see if it comes off of the Chargers bye week, which will be coming here in the next coming weeks. But Kamani Vidal, it was a tough one, especially with the nice matchup that he had. I know I started him in one of my leagues, didn't really do too much. Thankfully, I had some other receivers and Caleb Williams put up a lot of numbers to save my day for this past week. But Kamani Vidal, I wouldn't panic too much. He's still the RB1 for now, but rest of season-wise, you're more than likely going to see a Martin Hampton back in this lineup, and he's going to take over back those RB1 role. Now let's go on to the wide receiver dud, and what was a most disappointing start of the week was Rome Odunze of the Chicago Bears. And this one doesn't make any sense at all. A game where the Bears put up 49 points and Odunze doesn't have 0 receptions. He did have 3 targets, so it's not like he was getting involved in the offense like Caleb Williams wasn't looking towards him. But 0 receptions, 0 fantasy points like I mentioned. Most of the work, obviously, Caleb Williams got that receiving touchdown. You saw a lot of common guy with DeAndre Swift out for this past weekend's game. You saw Colston Loveland have a big game, and DJ Moore also had 2 receiving touchdowns along with that 1 passing touchdown that went to Caleb Williams. So Rome Odunze now back-to-back duds. Definitely, if you have Rome Odunze, definitely need to be concerned for him the rest of the season. You do have a nice matchup, like I mentioned, going up against the New York Giants. So we will see if Odunze can bounce back in this offense. Tight end dud, not really too many tight end duds this week. You could have went with George Kittle. I would just went with Tyler Warren just of the matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers because everybody's been scoring against this Pittsburgh Steelers offense. And 5 receptions, 26 yards, 7.6 fantasy points. We will take it. But Tyler Warren has really been one of those elite tight ends, along with the Brock Bowers, even the Jake Fergusons and Trey McBrides this season. But it was just a matchup where I thought the Colts were able to, really put this in a shootout. I thought that it was going to be a shootout. But honestly, the Colts were never really in this game. It was the lack of Daniel Jones, and we didn't really see too much of Jonathan Taylor. Saw a lot of Alec Pierce in this game, which took away from Tyler Warren getting that touchdown. You saw Daniel Jones score that 1 yard rushing touchdown, where you could have seen either a JT score or a Tyler Warren score. So honestly, not that bad of a game. Just looking at the matchup, definitely a dud from Tyler Warren in this one. So that's our studs and duds of week number 9. Now let's go on to our news and injuries heading into week number 10. Before I get into more of the injury side, let's go ahead and talk about today's trades. Most of these are going to be on the defensive side. We'll also get to the offensive side, like Jacoby Myers and Rashid Shaheed will be the 2 wide receivers that we will definitely talk about today. But the big trade that happened on the defensive side was the Indianapolis Colts trading for Sauce Gardner, poaching him away for the New York Jets. So the Colts defense has been one of the top fantasy defense. I know that they struggled against the Pittsburgh Steelers, but I think moving forward, you had a guy like Sauce Gardner, which is already a loaded cornerback room. I definitely think if you already have the Colts defense roster, go ahead and plug them into your lineup. Just play them based on the matchups. But if you need a defense, if they're on the waiver wires, definitely the Indianapolis Colts adding Sauce Gardner will only make that defense better here in the near future. Another defensive piece, the Dallas Cowboys acquired defensive tackle Quinn Williams. In another trade with the Jets were definitely sellers. They got a lot of picks, especially first-round picks. They got 2 in that trade with the Colts, 1 first-round pick coming from Dallas. So Dallas's defense honestly had one of their best games of the season against the Arizona Cardinals. I know that game got really away from the Cowboys, but you did have that special teams touchdown, that block punt that resulted in a touchdown. So I'm not saying the Cowboys are going to turn into this elite defense. The Cowboys have been one of the worst defenses in fantasy football, so I'm not going to tell you go pick them up. Obviously, if they have some good matchups, sure, but Quinn Williams is definitely going to be a nice piece for this Dallas defense here in 2025 and beyond. Let's go ahead and get into some news here. We're just going through the news, and then we'll get back to some more trades here. The Arizona Cardinals announced today that they are sticking with Jacoby Brissett, for this upcoming Sunday's game against the Seattle Seahawks. So that is good. Interesting piece of news because Kyler Murray has been injured. He was off of the injured list heading into Monday night's game. Arizona ended up not going that route. So I think this is going to be an interesting piece here in the offseason. We didn't see Kyler Murray get traded today during the trade deadline. So if let's just say, Jacoby Brissett has a nice couple of games here to end the season. Do we see a Kyler Murray trade in the offseason? We will definitely see. But for now, Jacoby Brissett, Marvin Harrison Jr. In a nice matchup. Like I mentioned in last week's show, 20-plus fantasy points for him, one of his best outings of the season. But like I mentioned with Marvin Harrison Jr., it's a roller coaster ride. He can have 20 fantasy points one week, and he can come back the next week and only give you 2 fantasy points. So we did see Bam Knight have a pretty solid game. You're going to be seeing Trey Benson coming off of the injured reserve, so Bam Knight is going to lose that luster as long as Trey Benson is in the starting lineup. But really outside of that, Marvin Harrison Jr., Trey McBride, and Trey Benson / Bam Knight are the only fantasy relevant players on that roster. Now let's move on back to some more trade news. The Seattle Seahawks added to their wide receiver room by trading for Rashid Shaheed. They traded for a 4th and a 5th. So this Seahawks wide receiver room, who was already stacked with talent. You have JSN, your wide receiver 1. Torrey Horton had 2 receiving touchdowns in that Sunday night game against Washington Commanders. Cooper Kupp, he's had his games every now and then. But I do expect Rashid Shaheed to step into this wide receiver 3, maybe even wide receiver 2 role, because Clint Kubiak, you got to remember, he was the offense coordinator last season with Rashid Shaheed when Kubiak was in New Orleans. Now Kubiak is in his first year as the offense coordinator with the Seattle Seahawks. So Sam Darnold, his stock is only going to go up in fantasy football. And I definitely think that Rashid Shaheed is going to upgrade his fantasy stock as well. Coming out of like one of the worst offenses in the league with Tyler Shuck and Spencer Rattler, Shaheed is definitely upgrading in the offense. He already knows the system that Kubiak is running, so I do expect Rashid Shaheed to really be a threat. Though you do have a lot more weapons to deal with in New Orleans, where Rashid Shaheed was wide receiver 2. You had Chris Olave. So we know what Shaheed has been. He's a boomer bust guy. Like if on the boom games, like he has like those 80+ yard receiving touchdowns to get him over. And then he'll have like the bust games where he gets like 2 catches for 20 yards and like 3 fantasy points, something like that. So I definitely think that this is good news if you are Rashid Shaheed owner moving forward. So there was some talk that AJ Brown rumors was going to be traded. Eagles ended up not trading them, so that's just a good piece of news if you are an AJ Brown fantasy owner. We did see Jacoby Myers going from the Raiders to the Jaguars, so this is definitely interesting scenario for the Jacksonville Jaguars because you already had Travis Hunter placed on the injured reserve heading into week number 9, so he's going to miss the next at least 3 games here for the Jags. Brian Thomas did suffer an injury this past Sunday, so we will see if BTJ is going to be able to play for Jacksonville in Sunday's game against the Houston Texans. But Parker Washington has really cemented himself as a nice option here in fantasy football. So Jacoby Myers, we will see how he's going to operate in this offense because if we don't have Brian Thomas this week, then it's going to be Parker Washington, the wide receiver 1. Then you're going to have Jacoby Myers as a wide receiver 2 because you still don't have Brendan Strange. Strange has been on the injured reserve. We probably won't see him back here in the next couple of weeks. So just keep that in mind if you do have Jacoby Myers on your bench. And then I'm not going to say like, hey, go ahead and, use your fab or use your waiver wire claim on a guy like Jacoby Myers because he really needs to prove it in this new offense. So that is most of the trade news there. You had a couple of receivers and a couple of defensive players. The injury news, we did have a big one at the quarterback position. Jaden Daniels suffered a gruesome injury on Sunday night's matchup. So I'm just expecting that he's probably going to be out for the majority, if not the rest of the season. And I think that's pretty much the majority of the news and the injury news that I really wanted to get up to. It's still early on in the season. Looks like Schefter reported a couple of hours ago that Kyler Murray and the Cardinals have consulted with multiple doctors on his foot injury and have been told the timetables for recovery have been anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks with a increased chance of setback until it's properly healed. Murray now has more time to heal. So it looks like Brissett will be the starter for the rest of this season. I think that it's pretty clear that Kyler Murray's time in Arizona might be up. This might be where we see Kyler Murray get traded or a team for that. So let's see. Don't really see any other news that we really need to get into here. I'm just scrolling through ESPN to see if I'm missing anything here. I think that we pretty much got to all of that. That was all pretty much of the trade news that affected your fantasy football teams. We did get some more injury news. Chargers standout left tackle Joe Alt will undergo season-ending ankle surgery. However, we did get some news today right before the trade deadline happened at 3 o'clock Central Time. The Chargers did trade for Trevor Penning so that will be at a boost for that offensive line, losing a guy like Joe Alt there. So that's your news and injuries heading into week number 10. Definitely a busy news slate here as we head into this new week of the season. So just keep in mind the injury report and all the trade deadline news that we had today. With all that being said, let's go ahead and get into our Week 10 fantasy starts and sits. We will start off with the starts of the week. So as always here, I'm going to give you 2 quarterbacks, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and 2 tight ends. And then for the sits, I'll give you 1 of each for each position. Now let's move on to our first quarterback start of the week, and that's going to be Jared Goff of the Detroit Lions. Let's first go to the matchup against the Washington Commanders. And my gosh, the Commanders secondary has been abysmal against opposing fantasy quarterbacks. So this is definitely a splash play for Jared Goff. So if you have Jared Goff in your lineup, this is a must-start option because the Commanders have allowed the 3rd most points to quarterbacks. I mean, we just saw what Sam Darnold and that offense was able to do. You saw Torrey Horton get a couple of touchdowns. So Amon-Ra is obviously a must start. The two running backs as well, Jamison Williams, who we'll get into here in a couple of minutes. But looking at his projected totals, 18.9, wouldn't be surprised if we do see Goff get into that 20-plus point mark, because I've seen pretty much every quarterback in the past couple of weeks get to that mark. So Jared Goff should be right in line with that, especially with the way that the Lions offense has really played the past couple of weeks here. Projected passing yards is at 278, and projected passing touchdowns is at 2. So I'm expecting Jared Goff and this Detroit Lions offense to continue dominating their opponents here. So I'm expecting a lot of points, at least on one side, with the Lions. And the Commanders more likely going to be rolling with Marcus Mariota, especially with Jaden Daniels being out probably for the majority of this season. Now let's move on to the next quarterback. We're going to roll with the hot hand here in Caleb Williams of the Chicago Bears. Like I mentioned, Williams coming out off of that near 40-plus point outing against that high-powered offense that they faced off against in the Cincinnati Bengals. Another good matchup against the New York Giants. This Giants defense have allowed 15 passing touchdowns to the quarterback. So I know it's been a roller coaster ride this season if you do have Caleb Williams. I'm just trusting him in this Bears offense to continue that. You're seeing Colston Loveland also really step in this offense, even with Cole Kmet being available. Rome Odunze, I think that he's going to bounce back well here in week number 10. You are starting to see Kyle Monangai get heavily involved with DeAndre Swift out. So Caleb Williams is just a quarterback that I'm going to trust and ride with him the rest of the season. Now let's move on to this same matchup. Kyle Monangai of the Chicago Bears. Now this is going to be based if DeAndre Swift doesn't play. If DeAndre Swift plays, I still like Swift. So whichever running back is available, I really like in this matchup against the New York Giants, because this defense have allowed the second most fantasy points per game to the running backs. So they have definitely been gettable against opposing running backs. And Kyle Monangai, when without DeAndre Swift, I know it was the Cincinnati Bengals and everybody's running on the Bengals defense this season. He didn't have a touchdown. If he did have a touchdown, he would have easily gotten over 30 points. So he got 22 fantasy points on the day and not even finding the end zone there. So all Kyle Monangai needs is to find the end zone. We will see if he can do it on Sunday against the Giants. But looking at his projected total points, looks like this 9.6. Projected rushing yards are right around that 50-yard mark, and projected rushing touchdowns is at 0.4. So Kyle Monangai, if DeAndre Swift doesn't play, I would play him. And if DeAndre Swift, I mean, you could go either way. Even whenever Swift was on the field, you are still seeing Kyle Monangai get involved in this offense. Is pretty similar to the Detroit Lions, offense the past couple of years with Dave Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. Now let's move on to our next running back start of the week. That's going to be J.K. Dobbins of the Denver Broncos. I know it wasn't pretty for J.K. Dobbins. It was a very tough matchup going up against the Houston Texans, who was pretty solid against them. Even in the 18-15 win over the Texans, a pretty solid matchup on Thursday night against the Las Vegas Raiders, who have allowed the 10th most fantasy points per game to their running back position. I know it hasn't been the past couple of weeks, hasn't been too pretty for J.K. Dobbins. You are starting to see R.J. Harvey cut up into his role, but J.K. Dobbins, this is a plus matchup. I'm pretty much starting every Denver Bronco. I mean, I'm starting Bo Nix, I'm starting Courtland Sutton, Troy Franklin. Pretty much everybody in this offense is really going to have a nice game against the Las Vegas Raiders, so I'm starting J.K. Dobbins this week. Now let's go on to a question. Is R.J. Harvey or Colston Loveland the priority pickup this week? I'm going to go with Colston Loveland. You are starting to see Loveland really take over that tight end 1 spot. I think that he's going to be a tight end 10 the rest of the way. So give me Colston Loveland. I still think that J.K. Dobbins is the RB1 for this offense. So give me Colston Loveland and give me a premium tight end for the rest of this season. Now let's move on to our wide receivers. I did mention him talking about Jared Goff. We are going to go with Jamison Williams. The Detroit Lions, and Williams had one of his best games of the season this past Sunday in the Lions' victory. And this is another good matchup. We're just going after the Washington Commanders defense that's really been gettable, not only for wide receivers, but quarterbacks. And this Commanders defense have allowed the 6th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. So Williams, is starting to get involved in this offense. Amon-Ra St. Brown didn't have the touchdown. It was Jamison Williams. You had Sam Laporta get 2 touchdowns in that game. He had an explosion in their win in week number 9. So Jamison Williams once again, is a plug-and-play option. So if you need him in your flex or as your wide receiver 2 option, especially with a lot of wide receivers on the bye, like most notably Rashee Rice is on the bye. So Jameson Williams is going to be a stud this week against the Washington Commanders. Now let's move on to our next wide receiver option. This is going to be Quentin Johnston of the Los Angeles Chargers. And a couple of weeks back, we were starting to get worried about Johnston because he started off the season hot. He was able to bounce back this past week against the Tennessee Titans, in which Justin Herbert just continues to shine in this offense. Going back to the matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers coming off probably their best defensive performance against the Colts in week number 9. We will see if that continues. But this Steelers defense so far this season has allowed the second most points to the wide receiver position. So I know this is a stacked wide receiver group. You have Johnston, you have Ladd McConkey, who is starting to become this wide receiver 1. Keenan Allen, I think, is more than likely going to be the wide receiver 3 most of this season, and Oronde Gaskin too. So there's a lot of mouths to feed in this offense. I think this is going to maybe get into a shootout here against the Steelers. So I feel really good about Quentin Johnston continuing from his good performance here that he had in week number 9 against the Titans. Let's go on to another question here. Is Bam Knight droppable, or should I drop Brian Robinson? I have CMC. I think at this point, I would drop Brian Robinson. I just don't think that he's really valuable at this point. Bam Knight is still going to be valuable, though, like I mentioned a couple of minutes ago. You will have Trey Benson coming back from the injury reserve as early as this week, but I just don't think that Brian Robinson is going to provide that much value. CMC has really been the guy this season for the 49ers. I just don't really see that changing. So out of the two, I would feel more comfortable dropping Brian Robinson at this point of the season. Now let's move on to the tight ends. We're going to go with Dalton Schultz of the Houston Texans. It is a nice matchup that he has going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. This is the defense that have allowed the second most points to the tight ends. So the Bengals have allowed the most points. The Jaguars are second in that category. So Dalton Schultz hasn't really been that popular of a name here on the show. Usually he's a sit for us because we haven't really trusted this Houston Texans offense. But this is the matchup where I think that Schultz could definitely go over these projected points. Like receiving yardage, he's only at 38. Receiving touchdowns, he's projected at 0.2. And points is at 9.2. Wouldn't be shocked at all if he can get over some of these categories here. So Dalton Schultz, I know that a lot of people haven't rostered him this season. So if you do need a plug and play, if you're dealing with injury, like I mentioned to Tucker Kraft, or if you have a tight end on the bye, Dalton Schultz would definitely be a nice streaming option here in week 10 in a solid matchup against the Jags. Let's move on to the next tight end, Kyle Pitts. I know a lot of people are just going to have a smirk on their face because when they see a Kyle Pitts, I mean, this is Kyle Pitts' breakout season. That's pretty much been the story of this fantasy season. But it is a nice matchup, once again, going up against the Indianapolis Colts, a defense that have allowed the fourth most points to the tight end position. And Kyle Pitts, Drake London coming off a really solid performance, 38 fantasy points in the Falcons game in week number 9. So this could be a high-scoring game. I know this is two really good defenses between the Colts and the Falcons, but Kyle Pitts, I know if you do have him on your bench, I would go ahead and plug him to your lineup there because Darnell Mooney hasn't been all that fantastic. Bijan Robinson will also get some receiving yardage with Michael Penix Jr., but Kyle Pitts has really been a top 3 option for Michael Penix. So I will start Kyle Pitts in a nice matchup going up against the Colts as a team that's going to be looking to get back on track there. However, though, I do like this matchup for Pitts at the tight end spot. So that's our starts of the week, and now let's go on to our Week 10 fantasy sits of the week, starting at the quarterback position. We're going to stay in that matchup there, Daniel Jones and Indianapolis Colts. It was one of his worst performances of the season. But Daniel Jones, we have seen like those performances when he was with the New York Giants, so not too surprising there. Matchup, though, it is a tough one going up against the Atlanta Falcons. The defense has really been gritty against the quarterbacks. It's only allowed the 6th fewest fantasy points to the quarterback position. So Daniel Jones looking at his projected total points at 19.3. Passing yardage at 242, and his projected passing touchdowns is at 1.6. So Daniel Jones, I I just don't really expect a bounce back here. I think that, like I mentioned, this could either be a low scoring game or a high scoring game here. So I would just look for a better quarterback, though, if you do have another option there and bench Daniel Jones for this week. Now let's move on to our next running back, Rachaad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Still don't know when we're going to see Bucky Irvin back in this starting rotation for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. However, this is a very tough matchup going up against the New England Patriots defense that have yet to allow a running back to have more than 50 rushing yards. And Rachaad White has really been inconsistent these past couple of weeks here, as the Bucs have faced stiffer competition. Obviously, the last time that we saw the Buccaneers was a blowout win against the New Orleans Saints. But Rachaad White, this is a tough matchup. If you do have another running back option, I would try to go another way. Would you rather have RJ or Bam then? I think I would rather have RJ Harvey at this point. I think that Trey Benson, once he comes back, he's going to be the bell cow running back. You were starting to see the opposite in Denver with RJ Harvey starting to cut into J.K. Dobbins' role there. So I'd rather have RJ Harvey at this point. Now let's move on to our wide receiver sit. Again, we're going to go sit another Indianapolis Colts here. I know that a lot of people are going to be saying, well, why are you benching Alec Pearson when he's coming off one of his best games of the fantasy season? That's great. But it's a tough matchup going up against the Atlanta Falcons, a defense that have allowed the 11 fewest points to the wide receivers. So I'm not saying the Falcons are going to shut out the Colts here. They're going to score some touchdowns. I think, though, Jonathan Taylor is going to get the focal point here because the Falcons have been more gettable against the run than versus the pass there. So nothing against Alec Pierce. I just think that it's going to be the Jonathan Taylor show against the Falcons there. Tight end, let's go to Evan Ingram of the Denver Broncos. I know a lot of people are going to say, well, this is a very good matchup going up against one of the worst defenses with the Las Vegas Raiders. They have allowed the third most fewest receptions to the tight ends, however. And we know what Evan Ingram has been. He can have a big game or he can have really nothing at that point. So at this point of the season, I'd rather just have another tight end option at this point. I'd rather have a guy like Luke Musgrave, Colston Loveland, or even Dalton Kincaid in this point in the season. Let's go on. No, you're fine. You're not asking many questions, so I'm just here to help. Let's go on to your next question here. Or is Jaden Daniels droppable? I have Stafford as my quarterback otherwise. Yeah, I don't really expect Jaden Daniels to be back this season. It was a very gruesome injury, probably a dislocated elbow for what I saw in Sunday's game. So I think Stafford, rest of the season, you're going to be fine. So if you're looking for a waiver wire option, if you need a drop, Brian Robinson or Jaden Daniels, I would definitely be okay with that. Hopefully that all those questions that you asked me, I was able to answer for you. If you have any more questions, trade, start, sits, let me know. That's why I'm doing this show, so we can help each other out. Now let's go on to our fantasy team to see how we did in week number 9. We've been keeping up with this team every single week. And this was a big matchup. Like I mentioned, we were 5-3. Our other opponent was 6-2 heading into this matchup. So this was a big win for us. 118 to 104. We are really now in the thick of this race here, both at 6-3. We will go through each quarterback and the rest of the position to see if we're able to make most of our movement here. Looking at the quarterbacks, it was pretty similar. Jared Goff had 19. Daniel Jones had 14. So that was big for us because look at the margin. Only 14-point margin, so we're able to win the quarterback category there. Looking at the running back, we know that we were going to have to deal with Christian McCaffrey, and man, CMC put it on us with 34 points. But we didn't really have anything of Nick Chubb with 3 points. On our side, we did start Bam Knight. I was really looking for a better matchup, and Bam Knight, even this plus matchup, didn't really do too much for us. Only 6 fantasy points. I did start Alvin Kamara early on in this week. Good thing I didn't. I would rather have the 6 points than the 0.2 points that Alvin Kamara did for us. We did start Chase Brown since Saquon Barkley was on the bye week in week number 9. Chase Brown continues to be a riser in my rankings, especially the running back position, 19.2 fantasy points, and even in the loss. I mean, gosh, the Bengals defense is the worst. I mean, how do you put up 42 points and still lose that game? Beats me. Wide receivers, DK Metcalf and Chris Olave for my opponent, both had 2 and 8. Brian Thomas had 8 points, though he did get injured late in that game. That game did go in overtime, so BTJ was healthy. He probably could have got easily over double digits in that game. Jackson Smith and Jigba continues to be one of our stars for our team, 22 points. Jake Ferguson and Tyler Warren, pretty even there. Ferguson was able to bounce back from his goose egg performance last week, putting up 8 points. Tyler Warren had 7.6 points in the loss against the Pittsburgh Steelers. We did go George Kittle, so we went to tight ends. George Kittle, 6.9 points. I mean, Kittle has been okay. He hasn't been like that flashy coming back from the injury. It was a gruesome injury that he suffered in week number 1. Derrick Henry, his flex, had 13 points. Look at the defenses. Seahawks had 11. Lions had 9. Look at our kickers, both double digits. Kaimi Fairbairn had 17 points for us, so I'll definitely take that at the kicker position. Cameron Dicker, his kicker, had 11. Looking at if we made all the good moves, I mean, we probably could have gone with Romeo Doubs over George Kittle. Bo Nix, I mean, pretty similar stat line to Jared Goff, but I think that we pretty much made all the good moves. I mean, if we start Kamara, wouldn't have done that much for us. So we continue on now to 6-3. Let's go ahead and look at the standings to see where our league is headed to week number 10, and then we'll go to our roster, and then we look at here our week 10 matchup to see who we're facing off against. So it looks like the Birds actually lost his first game of the season, so that opens up the door for us to maybe crawl up in the standings here. We are tied in a three-way tie here for second. DeBirds at 8-1. Then you have us with two other teams at 6-3. You have 2 5-4 teams, and then you have 1 3-6 team, and the rest of the pack is at 2-7. Looking at the points for, though, however, we do need to get some more points here. We are 4th overall, just behind the third place team, and then points against. We are actually the best in that category, so some pretty good defense for us. So our win streak, after all that, moves to 2. Now let's go on back to our roster here to see if we do need to make any changes, make any waiver claims. So let's go ahead and look at that. So it looks like we do have Saquon Barkley. And I do expect him to trade Benson back. This is a tough matchup against the Seattle Seahawks. So I'm going to go Alvin Kamara here, actually, against the Carolina Panthers. I think that's a plug and play there. George Kittle, I would like for him to be in the lineup, but I'm going to go toward Franklin here. I think that he's really been a star for the Denver Broncos. I think a lot of the talk is behind, Courtland Sutton being the wide receiver 1. But honestly, it's not very too far-fetched that Troy Franklin is a wide receiver 2 in this option. I think we're going to go with Emeka Egbuka over Brian Thomas Jr. I think that's going to be the lineup for us here. The only really buy that we have to monitor is Chase Brown. Other than that, we are at full strength here heading into week number 10. Looking at our bench, we could definitely make some moves here. Bam Knight, like I mentioned, with Trey Benson coming back, is going to be too much of an option for us. And with Cam Scadaboo, I think at this point, we could probably just kick him to the curb. But I think for team morale, we might just have to keep Scadaboo on the injured reserve. Let's go ahead and go position by position to see what players that I myself would like to add, as well as help you out on some players that I think could really help you out, not only in week number 10, but for the future. So looking at our quarterbacks, obviously if you have a guy like Jackson Dart, go ahead and pick him up. I think that this is going to be a high-scoring matchup. Once again, that the Chicago Bears are in. I do like Matthew Stafford rest of season. Same with Sam Darnold. It is a tougher matchup against the Arizona Cardinals, but with Darnold, I mean, he added a guy like Rashid Shaheed that's only going to boost his stats moving forward. But we're solid at the quarterback position. I mean, we could go with Jackson Dart here, sure. But we do have, Jared Goff and Bo Nix, which I'm fine with. But if I do feel an option, we could go pick up Jackson Dart. Looking at the running backs, Trey Benson, just monitor that. If he is back, I wouldn't even play him either. This is a tough matchup going up against the Seahawks. I did say to pick up Tyjae Spears. He is on the bye week, but could be a nice option. Same with R.J. Harvey. You are starting to see Harvey get more involved in this offense. Any other running backs, not too interested in all the rest of these candidates. Wide receiver options, Jameson Williams could be a nice option for you this week. Trey Tucker, he is now the wide receiver 1 for the offense, but it is a tough matchup going up against the Denver Broncos. So maybe that's just a wait and see to see. And then Christian Watson, too. I think he's going to start getting more involved in this offense there. Going on to the tight ends. You got Kyle Pitts, Dalton Kincaid. So these are some really nice tight ends. Theo Johnson coming off of a touchdown game. A game where he put up 11 PPR fantasy points. So Theo Johnson could definitely be a play. Other tight ends, maybe Cade Otton. I know that Mike Evans still is dealing with an injury, as well as Colston Loveland. And we did mention Dalton Schultz playing the matchup there. So there's some nice tight end options in this league. But we do have Tyler Warren and George Kittle, so not really running towards a tight end this week. Looking at our defensive streamers in week number 10, the Jaguars could be an option against the Houston Texans. The Bills going up against the Dolphins. I wouldn't touch the Falcons. The Browns going up against the Jets. I mean, that's just should be self-explanatory there. But really, I think that's really all the other defenses that I see. So if you're in desperate need of a defense, maybe the Rams against the 49ers, depending if Brock Purdy doesn't play or not. The Jags against the Texans could be a spot. Bills versus the Dolphins, probably your priority at number 1 for the defense. Same with the Browns against the Jets. So really looking at our roster here, I don't really see where we can make any changes. I do like the option of Jackson Dart, but I just like, Jared Goff's a match up there. Bo Nix, maybe we drop him. I don't know, but we will definitely monitor that for the rest of the season. But I think for now, we're going to stay put. I don't think that we didn't make any waiver claims for now. Maybe, later in the week, I'll look back to see if we do need to make some changes. But I think this is going to be our starting lineup for now. Like I mentioned, I could make some changes just depending on if Brian Thomas is available or not. It is a tough matchup against the Texans. This is why I am going towards Troy Franklin. Now let's go look towards our matchup here in week number 10 going up against Jeff's scary team. And we'll also look at our other matchups that we have in this league. And I think we're going to close the book here on today's show. Now let's go ahead and pull things up here. We're going to wait for this to load. Jeff's scary team. All right, so he's 3-6. I'm 6-3. We are projected to win this one. We did have a previous matchup in week number 1, as you see here. Did take the last matchup 116-95, so hopefully we'll be able to do the same. Looking at his roster, he has Baker Mayfield, Kyron Williams, Travion Henderson, Justin Jefferson, A.J. Brown, Sam Laporta. Yeah, this is a stacked team, to be honest with you. You have Ladd McConkey as your flex. I mean, his wide receivers have really been solid. Justin Jefferson, A.J. Brown. I know that A.J. Brown has been up and down this season, but Ladd McConkey has been catching fire. So it looks like it's only bye that he has that he's dealing with is Harrison Butker as kicker. So he's also going to be full strength as well. So it should be a pretty nice matchup. I mean, he's 3-6. It must be a lot of bad luck because he has a pretty solid team, at least as a starters. So this is going to be another tough matchup here. Now let's move on to our next matchups. We have 2-7 versus 2-7. So this one, not really worried about that one. I think both of these teams are pretty much out of the playoff race at this point. We do have 5-4 versus 2-7 between MDR and Tyler's talented team. Big matchup here. We have the Birds, who's 8-1, and Mushrooms, who is 6-3. So this is a big matchup here. We're probably rooting for Mushrooms to beat the Birds here, so we can hopefully we can win our matchup, and the Birds falls to 8-2. So we will keep track of that. And Doge versus Ben's best team is our final matchup. 6-3 versus 5-4. So that is our league. We're able to get another win there to move now to 6-3. So we're looking pretty good for the playoffs so far. Hopefully we continue to win, and maybe we can lock up that 1 or 2 seed for this league. I appreciate it. Just subscribe. Really appreciate it. I appreciate all the questions that you had. I'll be live every single week for the rest of the season and leading up to the fantasy playoffs. So I appreciate everybody for tuning in to today's live show. Keep up with our fantasy content throughout the duration of this week, as well as college football content. Like I mentioned, I did put out a waiver wire ads video earlier today. So if you missed that, go ahead and check that out before you make your waiver claims this week. And we'll also, with our live show, we'll also have our SEC talk show tomorrow night. We'll be previewing all the big games in the conference, as well as looking at the college football playoff rankings that just got released here just momentarily. So I do appreciate everybody for tuning in today's live show. We will be moving back to our normal Wednesday night show of SEC Talk, going back to its normal on Sunday or Monday night. So I appreciate everybody for tuning in to tonight's live show. Hope you enjoy the rest of your evening and week, and I'll see you all next time. So long for now.